Mudline fishing. It's been a hot topic lately on our live Q&As with me and Andy. A few of our subscribers struggling with the fish swimming around the float and they're getting really frustrated with it. I know on a lot of our match focus videos in the past we've done little bits and pieces of mudline fishing, especially with Andy's live matches at Partridge, but I wanted to do a proper masterclass on it. There's a few little things that make a massive difference, and I've always said this is the hardest part of F1 fishing. Today I've deliberately sat on, to be honest, one of my favourite pegs, if not my favourite peg at Tunnel, peg 10 on new. And the reason being is you've got to fish off of the bank, probably a good 18 inches, maybe 2 foot away from the bank to be able to get into the right depth of water to be able to catch them. When you can push your rig right up to the banking where it's a bit of a brick wall behind it, they're not that hard to catch. But when you've got to fish away from the bank, that's, you know, the biggest problem that people are suffering with. So we're going to head over to our box now and hopefully I can give you loads of little tips to make it just that little bit easier in the future. When it comes to our bait, I feel like I've learned a few little things recently that I want to talk you through from what I was doing differently, more importantly what I was doing incorrectly. So starting off with our micro pellets, the way that I used to prepare my micro pellets, used to just cover them in water, let them completely swell up, and that's how I always thought was the best way of doing it when you're fishing with micros, sort of dip in your pot, fishing an expander on the hook. It was only recently when I filmed my live match at Westwood, and I'm sure Andy might have said it to me a few times, but I never really grasped it, was semi-soaking your micros. So when you just cover them with water, look at your micro like an expander almost. You know, it's going to take up X amount of water and then it's going to go nice and soft all the way through. Now that's perfect in the winter time when you're rattling them out of your pole pot. They sink nice and slowly, they're very visible. The problem is when you fully blow your micros up, when you're fishing in shallow water, the fish, when they come in, they can move the whole volume of water. I've done it in my bath, I spoke about it before, where I've measured my bath exactly 12 inches, put some ground bait, put some micros in it, one waft of my hand, and the peg, or the bath, it takes forever to resettle. And when your micros are fully swollen up, they come up and they just waft so much more. Whereas when you semi-soak them, and I'll show you how to do it in a minute, they come up and they go back down. But don't get me wrong, the longer they're in the water, you know, they're going to absorb that water, but hopefully they've been eaten before then. So the biggest difference is how I'm preparing my micros. So with my water, I've got 2 tubs here because hopefully we're going to need a little bit of bait today. And all I'm going to do is pour the water on like so, stir it around in my fingers, and I always do it in 2 bait tubs, however much water I need. And then I'm literally just going to pour the water into our second tub of micros. You know, if you drop an odd one in, don't overly worry about it. And then I'm going to completely drain the water into that tub. And once we're fishing, these will dry out by the time, you know, we're ready to start fishing. But then what you can do with your separate bait tub of water, almost just like we do on a method feeder, you can sort of wet them up, because it's all about the compression in your pot. That's one of the biggest things about your mudline fishing. So by doing them this way, you know, if they're not binding in your pot properly, then you can just dip your fingers in the water and rebind them. But today, what I want to focus on, to be honest, is ground bait and micros. I think when you can catch them, when you get the depth right, and the fish are, you know, happy to eat micro pellets with a formal expander on the hook, they're not that difficult to catch more often than not, because with that it's all food. So they're going to come in, eat the micro pellets, there's no real cloud, then, you know, not unless the bottom's really clayey, but they're always going to be able to find your bait. It's when you start and have to feed ground bait to get them to come in the peg, where normally they're harder to catch. So ground bait wise, I've just mixed up our Commercial Masters pole mix. There's been loads of videos done on this. If you're ever unsure, some people like to, you know, once you've used it a bit, you can add quite a lot of water at the start. But if it's the first time you used it, just mix it up like normal, little and often, because once we've added our micros and our ground bait mixed together, which we do on the peg, you're going to have to add water to it then. So don't think, oh, I've got to, you know, try and flood it with water at the start. All I do, to be honest, is put whatever ground bait I want in, pour a bit of water and just whop it around in my bucket. That's it. And because it's an expander based ground bait, it'll take a lot of water. So, but again, if first time you've used it as such, just mix it up like normal ground bait. You can always add more water to it. So we've got our little duck friends here. They know that there's some food here, and to be honest, a lot of the time when I'm doing my match reports after the match, they always come and sit nicely on the grass because they know they get fed around me. So onto our ground bait and micro mix. I'm going to play around with that on the day, but with your micros, when you're fishing with micros and a 4mm expander, you're only ever going to fish with a 4mm expander. Whereas with ground bait, the problem is when you're starting to use sort of a medium pot or a large pot, again, we go in more detail when we're actually fishing, a 4mm expander, it doesn't stand out enough. So baits that normally are the best, to be honest, for F1s and carp, when you're fishing with your ground bait and micros mixed, are normally a bit of a worm, you know, depend on, you know, the size, how many fish are in your peg. If you're starting to use like a paste pot or a large guru, you know, even a whole worm can be really good on the hook if you've got big carp in your peg. Live maggots, that's a brilliant hook bait as well. So I've just got some nice big fresh white live maggots, 3-4 white maggots on the hook. That can be absolutely brilliant as well. But at times when you're feeding ground bait, you can get quite a few little perch in your peg. So what I've done is I've just done some 6mm expanders, and these are a nice 6mm expander. Again, when I'm talking about expanders, they all come in batches, so it's a case of trying to find, you know, a really good batch. So with my expanders, I've just pumped them, but I want to show you in my bag. So our 4mm expanders from Blake's, just going to hold them there so Baz can get a nice close-up on them. They're a nice sort of goldeny colour, very, very uniform, and that type of colour, shape, is really, really nice for a 4mm. But the problem is when you start getting to a 6mm, they're harder, to be honest, to find a really good 6mm pellet. Now these ones, you'll be able to see in the bag the amount of oil in there because I've had them for that long. And these were, to be honest, I don't use many 6mm expanders, so I don't really search for them. But these ones were a Ringers one, and I just see some in the shop, and you'll be able to notice they're a little bit darker in colour compared to our, so if I get a few of our 4mm out, you'll be able to see they're a little bit darker in colour. But when it comes to a 6mm pellet, more so than a 4mm pellet, they've got to, you know, absorb quite a bit more water. And what you find with a lot of your 6mm is they swell up and they just disintegrate to mush. So I'm just going to chuck them. I should have chucked them there for them. Go on, you can have a few of me good 6mm, go on. Fill your boots as such. So it is a case of trying to find a good 6mm pellet. I know that Sonu baits sell a sinking 6mm. I'd never, to be honest, use a sinking 4mm, but if you can't find any good 6mm expanders, I'd much rather use a real proper expander for it, i.e. one that when you put in water it floats. But if you can't find any, they'll probably be your best option. But I would say today, normally it's maggots or worms tends to be the best hook bait. But I know that there's been sort of an influx, a little tiny perch here. So I've literally just done some 6mm expanders for the hook. But that is it really with our bait. The biggest thing that I've learned is your micro pellets. Starting to prepare them that way, I just think it's 1,000 times better than, you know, fully submerging them in water and letting them fully expand, because they just go too light when they're in the water. And when it's, what we said, is very, very shallow, the thing is, you get a good fish come in your peg, it's going to move the whole volume of water. So if your micros are too light, and this is something I've definitely suffered with in the past, they end up blowing the bait everywhere. Not like they're hard enough to catch at times anyway, but if they're wafting the bait all over your peg, it's just going to make them harder and harder to catch. So that is a hook bait on the bottom, and I've just got more chance of foul looking one. So again, same thing, shift forward, dip my pot, rig up and drop it in. Now the only thing I can do, because it's almost like Westwood at the moment, to be honest, there's that many fish in the peg, I might have to change to just feeding our micro pellets. And this is where, you know what I was saying, where I'll always have some separate to my ground bait mix. So because I've got that in my mind, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to literally wet them up, just wet the top layer up just by putting a bit of water on them, because they will take literally a minute or two just to absorb a bit of that water. So that's our first carp. Okay, look lovely in the top of the mouth, just wriggling like mad. Nice little carp, probably 3.5 pound. That's the one difference here. If we fish shallow all day today, and know with the conditions, with this warm wind blowing in 5 hours, I don't know how many you'd catch shallow, a lot, but I bet we wouldn't catch one carp shallow. Whereas over here, because it's that shallow water, that's the one advantage that shallow water offers you, is you can catch a few of them better fish. So literally just gonna give them micros a little bit, you know, more time just to absorb a bit more water, and then we'll have the option in a minute to be able to just feed neat micros. But you're making your choices, you're making all my decisions that I'm making, pot size, what do I want to feed, what's the best hook bait, on what's happening in my peg. You know, on another day you'd have to feed your large paste pot, you know, if they weren't coming in, or even potting it regularly. But if they're in my peg, I'm just responding to what the fish want. So again, nothing changes, push forward. The ones that are going past me, ignore them, push me rig forward. Oh, if I can, try and get it set. A bit awkward with that wind. It's normally good here, but the amount that are there at the moment is frightening, to be honest. So there, I had a bite. So the fact that these fish are so confident, no, twig. The ground bait might be, well, it probably is making it worse, because your ground bait, what I was saying before, that's your attractor to get them in your peg. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to change to micro pellets, just with a bit of a worm on the hook. I'm not going to change that, but just by feeding micros and no ground bait, and see if that changes the peg. Again, your peg's going to change a lot throughout the day as you're fishing. At times you'll have it, you know, really, really good when the fish are in your peg. So there, see how it's gone over one's back? Just need to lift it up, drop it back in again. But I need to slow it down. And this is the thing, what I was saying before, is you can have it where you've got no fish in your peg, and then you have it a bit like Westwood. It's very rare here, to be honest, to be able to see that many fish in your peg. So you either have it where there's no fish in your peg and you need to feed more, or you've got too many fish in your peg and you need to change what you're feeding. So again, bit of a worm on the hook, that seems best. Medium pot, just for our micro pellets. It's literally like a washing machine over there at the moment. Just wait for this wind just to drop a little second. So again, dip my pot, drop my rig straight on top of it. Again, big liner then. Just hold my rig. Wow. I don't know what you'd catch shallow today. You'd catch a hell of a lot though. That one's foul looked. So just sort my rig out. to be totally honest, I didn't think that there would be that many in the peg today. So my next move now, I'm going to carry on with my hook bait, but you can see they're just, at the moment, they're that confident, they keep coming in, and all of the time I'm feeding a lot of bait, they're going to carry on coming in. The only way I can slow it down is to feed less, or what I might have to do is how we fish at Westwood, where I'd never fish like that here, to be honest, where I might have to make a little bit of a slop just to try and be able to get my bait down in one hit. So I'm just going to feed a few less micras. Don't ever feel like, you know, oh, well, I won't feed. Oh, there's a bit of rubbish on the hook. Don't ever think, well, I won't feed this chuck. You have to feed every single time. So even though I've only just fed, I'm not going to ship my rig out, because one's just tailed, and by the time I get out I might not even have a trap left. So a few less micras in, again roughly half a medium pot. Again, ship forward, turn my pot over, dip my pot, pushed them in a little bit too hard. Then I see when I lifted up that there were still some micras in. So try and hold my rig the best I can. What I'm hoping, to be honest, is once I've caught one or two, normally what happens is it does actually slow down a little bit. So just gonna, there, my rig's just going off sideways. Thing is, looking at it now, if this ever happened in a match, which, well, for as long as I've been coming, I've never seen it like this, to be honest. You would be able to go into shallower water and catch them, but the truth of the matter is, I know in a match I wouldn't catch them in that depth, but that might, you know, be our next move. Foul one then, had a little bit of a scale. So again, I'm just going to try feeding, you know, that a little bit less bait, because that's the only way you control it. You can control it. And on a lot of pegs here, you haven't got the option, you know, of being able to go into shallower water. So this is the only way you can control it, is with bait. So again, lift my rig up, drop it in. But hopefully, if I start feeding, a little bit of a, definitely had a bite then. It's like my rig there, I don't know if it's, I was about to say, I don't know if it was hooked up on some of it. It was probably just over a fish's back. But every time I've fed, I've had a proper indication, had a proper bite. See now, literally, as soon as I've hooked one, my peg's slowed down a bit. Saying, in my matches, I've never, well, I'll be totally honest, I've never seen that many fish in my peg, ever. I knew it'd be good here, it's why I wanted to sit here, but with how many were there, that's a big F1. What I didn't want to do was start, you know, going into the real shallow water across.